So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this month's Discover Tennessee History webinar. I am Kira Jeep with Teaching with Primary Sources. And a couple things as we get started on our final webinar of the series for the 2023 school year. So a couple quick things, again, for those of you who are joining us live today. First off, thank you for taking the time to do that. A couple things, just reminders as we are recording this for inclusion on YouTube. For those who would like to watch it later, please keep your mics muted so that we have a nice clean audio. If you would, make sure that we have your first and last names. And as always, we love for our webinars to be interactive. So feel free to open up the chat box and use that as a way to interact with us throughout the session. We will also, of course, have some discussion questions as we go through some of our presentations. So feel free to unmute yourself and answer those questions as we get to those prompts. If you have any other thoughts or problems, again, feel free to put that in the chat box, and Stacy or myself will be monitoring that throughout the session today. With this webinar series, this is the third year that we have done this series with the partners with the Discover Tennessee History Collaborative. And so you can find all of the information for today's session, as well as for all of the previous sessions located on this Padlet page. So you can use the link that is here or the QR code that is there to access that. And that includes all of the recordings for previous sessions. So if you missed one, please feel free to go back and check those out. And we do award PD credit for viewing the recordings. And we'll have some information about how to get credit for that at the end of the session. So with that, today we are focusing, of course, on some of the great Tennessee history resources that our Teaching with Primary Sources program has developed over the last several years. And so what we thought we would do as our approach today is that myself, my colleague, Dr. Stacey Graham, and our current graduate research assistant, Abby Highcade, are each going to share some great resources and activities that we have identified from our pool of materials that we particularly like for teaching different eras in Tennessee history. Now, keep in mind, of course, with our program, all of our materials primarily are coming from the Library of Congress. So again, this is a way to kind of get a glimpse of some of the great materials that the library has that you can use to teach Tennessee history. I know we oftentimes think about it for teaching kind of the big US story, but they have some wonderful materials for teaching our local and state history. And hopefully, as we go through some of the resources today, you'll get a glimpse of some of that, and hopefully it will entice you to do some looking to dig and see some other sources that you might find there that you might find surprising. So with that, we're going to start with Abby, who's going to talk to us about some early Tennessee history. So Abby.
Thank you, Kira. I am Abby Highcade. I'm a GRA for Teaching with Primary Sources. And for pre-Civil War, we're going to be going over Tennessee's Western Frontiers lesson plan from the MTSU TPS website. So let me share my screen. How I'm going to do this presentation is I'm just going to follow along with the lesson plan here on my screen as I talk about it. Now, this lesson plan is kind of set in 2 or 3 parts. It's spread over 2 days. And on this front page, the understanding goal, the overall goal of this lesson plan is for students to understand and convey like the experiences of explorers migrating over the Appalachian Mountains into the Tennessee frontier in the late 18th century. This lesson plan covers not just history standards too, it also covers English language arts standards, because there are excerpts from the Library of Congress that covers the kind of like the culture and also just the mannerisms and other ways of life that frontier pioneers did as they crossed over into Tennessee. So day 1 here, let me start over. On the second page, we have our materials. Every link here where it says worksheet, this is going to take you down to the bottom page wherever the worksheet is. It's already connected to the link here. Here are the excerpts I talked about. You will get those in a second. But you have all your worksheets already in the lesson plan for you to use. And there's just an easy link to jump to it whenever you need it. Also included, you have your primary source analysis teacher guide. Some of you may be very familiar with these. If you click on it, it will take you directly to it. For this one, it's photographs and prints. There are photographs and prints that we use from Library of Congress. This is just one of them. I believe there's also one for, go back here. We have one for books and other prints. And then we have our worksheet, our very generalized worksheet. No, that's not it. This is also another example of our observation, our reflection and questions. The worksheet should be attached as well. Maybe it's down here. Let me see. Right here. No, okay. So maybe the worksheet is not attached to this, but it is on the Library of Congress website. When you go to finding your primary source sets, it's the very first link at the top of the page, and then underneath we'll have all those other analysis tools. On this third page, we have the primary sources from Library of Congress. The first one being the map of Tennessee. We're going to use that one in a second. Down here, your other resources that are not from the Library of Congress. Both are encyclopedia entries for David Crockett and Daniel Boone, who are the two subjects of this lesson plan. And then we're going to start over on a day one. So for day one, as like a starting activity, you have your two images of David Crockett. This one right here. You can zoom in if you like, so you can show more detail. You go back. And you have Daniel Boone here on, if it will load, on this page right here. And I believe you can zoom in on this as well. So the idea for those two images to show students is to let them use their observation skills and to think about detail. So you ask them, what are they wearing? What kind of clothes are they wearing? What does that tell you about them? What kind of supplies are they carrying? What how they use those as their journey to the frontier. And then you just saw David Crockett, he had dogs with him. So what would dogs, like what would their purpose serve as in the frontier, and so on and so forth. Just gives them a chance to open up their minds, use their observation skills, and talk about those certain details. Then you go into your first activity. So going down to step 4. Step 4 describes showing them a copy of a map of the Tennessee government, and formerly part of like North Carolina, and a map of state of Tennessee, all joining their territories. That link can be found on page 3, right up top here. And this is what it looks like. You can click on it and you can zoom in on it and show. So there's Knoxville in East Tennessee here. You have your Cumberland Mountains up here. Here's that border between Kentucky State and Tennessee State. Here are your Appalachian Mountains. And then over here, it's kind of hard to see, but you can find that you can locate Nashville right here as well. So for the activity, you give the students the map here, and what their task is to identify landmarks. So here are your you can identify rivers, you can identify mountains, you can identify certain flatter areas. And with that, after they identify those certain geographical landmarks and cities such as Nashville and Knoxville, they are going to create their own path, whatever path they decide to get from Knoxville or North Carolina to Nashville. They can take the mountains, they can take rivers, but the idea is for them to pick the easiest, safest route. So how are they going to navigate and create a path through all these landmarks, all this geographical landmarks? They can use rivers, they can use the mountains, it's all up to them, but they're determining their paths through consideration of possible maybe hardships, like would they rather climb a mountain or take a river, or perhaps if they can find a valley of some sort, such as the Cumberland Gap, they can take that as well. It's all based on like using their logic skills in this. And for for this activity to kind of work is for them to understand and identify certain geographical landmarks to determine like that best path to take from East Tennessee to Nashville. I would say, I mean, for just like a note purposes, I would say because this lesson plan is meant for 3rd, 5th, and 8th graders, this map may be a little bit too advanced for 3rd graders. I think 5th graders would be okay with it, 8th graders would be okay with it, but 3rd graders may require a more simplified, not so busy map, because they may get confused with all these words here. All the rivers are named, all the mountains are named, and then you have Nashville kind of like tucked away in here. So a more simplified map, I'm sure Library of Congress has one for like the 3rd graders so they can understand a little bit better. Going back down here. This lesson plan asks you to use the primary source analysis tool. Again, there's a worksheets, maybe not on this lesson plan, but there is one on the Library of Congress for you guys to use. And as it says, students are free to choose any stopping point on the map for their final destination. Nashville is just recommended, but that is totally up to the teachers on where their final destination is going to be. And then students will just share their past, their final destinations, and reasoning is a big word there. Reasoning for choosing them in the class. Your next step will be to show them the Cumberland, a image of the Cumberland Gap, which is this one is here, right here. Zoom in. Oh, well, I guess you can't zoom in this one. Okay, so I think the reason why they included this into the lesson plan is to give them an image. Let's say they didn't choose the Cumberland Gap as a way of their path after they already determined their paths. You show them this image is like, here is a river that cuts right through, and you don't have to go over all these mountains. You would compare this to the map, show them where it is on the map on an overhead, and explain to them like, this is what they would choose. This is what Daniel Boone, David Crockett used as they were exploring and traveling through the frontier. Our next, so step 8 is kind of the part 2 of this lesson plan. So part 1 was the images, the starting activity where they get to just identify and look at little details of David Crockett and Daniel Boone. They can read about Daniel Boone and David Crockett with those encyclopedia entries that I showed you above. And step 2, and step 1 is the map activity as well. Step 2, part 2, you have right here in step 8, it says you divide the class into 3 groups. Each group is going to get a different excerpts from Library of Congress. One of the excerpts is about a wedding, a pioneer wedding. The second one is a house raising description of frontier, on the frontier. And then there's an indentured servant excerpts as well. And so each group gets a different one and they can all read it. So, and then here are the excerpts all down here for you guys to go for easy access. So you click on it, it takes you right down to it at the bottom of the lesson plan. Same with the other ones right here. Go back up. So that will be the end of day 1. Day 2, they come back to those excerpts. So they probably need to reread them unless they take notes, which I highly advise for them to take notes, especially like details they find very interesting, because that will help them with the activity for each one. Now, each group has a different activity based on whatever excerpts they are reading. For the okay, before I continue, so for these excerpts, they are a little bit advanced. There are some more advanced words, such as like boisterous. Maybe some of the elementary school students may not know what that means. Petticoats would probably be another one to explain, and so on and so forth. So for maybe elementary schoolers, it would be kind of fun for the teachers to read to them so they can follow along. So if you're very enthusiastic about pioneer weddings, it'd be a really fun one. And then students can write down their favorite moments if they for the activities. Same here. So another word like frolic. I don't know, maybe I know what that means. Substantial. This is other words here and there as well. And this is an excerpt for the interest server too. So going back up to day 2, for group 1, they are in charge of the wedding description from Daniel Boone text, and they're going to be creating what is called a shadow box. So what a shadow box is essentially is a display case, and students will get to create sort of like a 3D effect by drawing 2D images and kind of like layering them. And the idea is with the instructions here, right here, the materials, I believe the materials are going to be provided by you teachers. All is here, right here. Here's your project, and then how to make this box. It's like really sets up the creativity of students, because they can create either like the ceremony scene. There's also a scene in the description where the bride is traveling to the ceremony, which I think is probably my favorite part. And you have people celebrating them as they go down the road. But it's totally up to the students and whatever they decide. It's really a good group project because each student will most likely have to have one job to contribute to it. Second group, they're using the real estate fact sheet for Daniel House's Boone. They're going to be drawing on here, right here, your real estate fact sheet. They're going to be drawing Daniel Boone's cabin based on the description from the excerpt. So they have to read the excerpt and basically follow the instructions of how it's described. And this is where they have their instructions here. And then afterwards, you will show them an image of the house. So a photograph of Daniel Boone's house. This is after they complete their drawing. And you get to see if they got close or not. How close did they get to drawing Daniel Boone's cabin? And then finally, the third group, their task is to read the David Crockett's experience as an indentured servant. And students can include characters like David Crockett, his parents, his employer, his siblings, his coworkers, others. And they will be filling out this graphic organizer right here. So using the excerpts with all the information, they fill this graphic organizer, very self-explanatory here. And then your planning sheet as well for the same group. Your questions. And then at the very, very end, everyone comes back. So group 1 gets to show off their shadow box. Group 2 can brag if they got close to recreating Daniel Boone's house in their drawing. And then students from talking about the indentured servant, they get to talk about like what they learn as well. And I think the most important here is discuss how their impression of the frontier experience has changed. I think that's pretty important. You can even have them fill out sticky notes at the very beginning of the lesson. It's like, what are your ideas? What do you already know about the frontier experience? And then after the lesson, go back to that question and see if their impressions have changed. And that is this lesson plan for Tennessee's frontier, Western's frontier.
Thanks, Abby. That one is an old one, but a good one. We've used it in workshops before, but it's been a long time. And so I'm glad that Abby brought it back up again and to remind everybody that it's there. I'm going to now turn to a different era of Tennessee history, and that is the New Deal era. And I'm going to share my screen and walk you through what I chose to highlight from among our many, many New Deal resources. So what I picked was one of our newsletter lesson ideas. And we do have newsletters that we have done on the New Deal. I think volume 1 and volume 2. We have a lot of lesson plans that we've done from that era and primary source sets and other kinds of things. But I wanted to pick something that might be a little bit harder to find if you were searching through our website. So from our newsletters, I chose one that I had done with my History 3011 students at MTSU back, that came out in January. And so it's about TVA water control. So it's under the theme of historical thinking, which is why you might not think to look there for something specifically about the New Deal. So if you go to that newsletter, this is on page 2. And I already have all my links up just in case the Library of Congress website is being slow. So this one was created to be about geographical awareness and that thinking skill, specifically social studies practices number 6. So it uses a lot of maps. And so it's a good way to talk about TVA activities in the state from a place-based approach. And this can be used for 5th grade. It can also be used at the high school level for either Tennessee history or US history. For 5th grade, you're going to want to kind of chop down parts of this as you see fit, because it's got a few different moving parts, but not nearly as many as in the Tennessee's Western Frontier lesson plan. That one's just packed. So basically, we start off looking at 2 different examples, Norris Dam and Watts Bar Dam, and we're going to look for them on this map that was created by TVA. And this is in the context of flooding and flood control and how that causes soil erosion and how the creation of the dams was supposed to prevent soil erosion and, you know, make floods not as bad, just as much as for hydroelectric power, which is something that most people think about when they think about dams. So when you click on Norris Dam, the Norris Dam link on the newsletter lesson idea, you'll get to a variety of different images from the FSAOWI photo collection at the Library of Congress from Norris Dam, because a lot of these TVA projects were very well documented by photography, and all of those images are going to be in the Library of Congress public domain. And some of them are really amazing, looking at kind of recreational uses, engineering masterpieces, pretty much all these huge structures, some of the CCC structures that were built, and some of the, you know, the landscape and the change to the landscape, and some people as well. There's a lot more pictures of people in the Watts Bar Dam collection. So I like these workers portraits here. It's again, within the context of government program, government taking these pictures. It does have some propaganda purposes here, because it's not in TVA's favor to show this program in a bad light. So this is showing, you know, good, solid, manly employment here. I like to think by looking at these photographs. And just workers' faces, you know, looking at individuals. So I really like all these photos here from Watts Bar Dam, and there are even more of them if you know, keep going through the pages. So that's why those are linked there. And okay, I've got to move this bar. Okay, so that I can reach these links. Okay, so the first map that this links to is this Tennessee Valley Area Pictorial Map. And this is where they're showing existing and proposed dams. So in that case, you want to look at the date and see, okay, it's 1939. So this is in the first decade of the program, which was started in 1933, like a lot of the New Deal programs. And this one is really nice and colorful. It has that wonderful kind of mid-century font. So it might be really engaging for students to look at. And yes, I know we looked at we looked at a map in the last one, but I just love maps so much. And they're just a really great way to bring in your artistically minded students as well as your kind of mathematically minded students. So basically, you want them to search the map and find Norris Dam and Watts Bar Dam. And so, you know, you can see they may not know where they are. So some of them might take a while. Some of them might know that Norris Dam is over near Knoxville, the birthplace of Admiral Farragut. That's an interesting touch that they put that there. He has nothing to do with TVA, but he was, I guess, somebody they wanted to highlight. So here we have Norris Dam on the Clinch River. And then when you look south, of course, they're gonna have to look around some more. On the Tennessee River, Watts Bar Dam proposed. So right away they can tell by 1939, Norris Dam's already been constructed. Watts Bar Dam has not been constructed yet, but is in the making. So just little clues that they need to learn to read when they look at these maps. And so then you want them to think about, okay, well, if the point of this is, you know, partially flood control and to save the soil from eroding, that must mean that it's benefiting a lot of the nearby communities. But also with the creation of lakes, you are not benefiting nearby communities when you are displacing them. So this looks at some of the benefits and the costs of creating these lakes. It's kind of ironic. In order to create flood control in certain parts, you have to flood other parts. But it's the control that's the difference here, flood control. So this lesson idea also talks about what are the small towns that are nearby, and you can look at these on Google Maps. So I'm going to go to my Google map and I am going to find, of course, you can just type in Norris Dam and it'll take you straight there. But you can also look and see, oh, Norris Lake, here's the lake, here's where the river gets wide. And so Norris Dam is up here near Andersonville and Norris. And so the dam would be where the lake turns back into a river, right? And there's usually a road going over it because you're driving across the top of the dam. So here's where the dam is. And so they can look at the historic pictures on the Library of Congress and think, oh, that's where it is on the Google map today. That makes it really immediate. And so you can think about, okay, what were the towns that maybe used to be here, but aren't anymore? And what are the towns that are still around here? Like, for example, you know, Norris is home to the Museum of Appalachia. They might have heard about that. Freighterville, we have a lesson idea on the Freighterville mine disaster that we did a few years ago. Okay, so, and Norris Lake, you can see, is quite large. It goes on for quite a while. And if we go down the Tennessee River, we're looking for Watts Bar Dam, right? So we find Watts Bar Lake, where it's really thick. And then the point at which it gets skinny, again, is where the dam is. So the dam is right here. And you have the reservoir and the dam reservation. So those are other clues that this is where the dam is. Of course, it's also called Watts Bar Highway, Watts Bar Dam Bridge. And so if you click on that, you can kind of, Okay, well, that's not a very good picture. But if you do like views, I wonder if you can, if I can see the dam from this Google view. All right, there it is. River's really high, I guess. Or it's such a bridge over the dam. Okay, I guess on the other side is where you see, because this is the lake and this is the river. So the waterfall would be going in the opposite direction. Okay, so once they've looked at those two, then we have another map for them to look at, which is bringing in some science. And this lesson idea doesn't actually have science standards, but it's still very interdisciplinary because we're now going to look at a reconnaissance erosion survey map from the US Soil Conservation Service. Soil conservation being a huge program in the New Deal, and Tennessee was very much in need of that. So this is from 1934, right after the implementation of much of the New Deal's initial programs. And so this was part of that. They were trying to find out, okay, where is the soil eroding the most? Where is there the most need for flood control? And so if you try to find where those places are, this is before the construction of either of these dams, we basically want to find what color are they in. So I'm the kind of person who really loves to read maps. And if you're not, then I apologize if I'm going too fast. But basically, I'm going to zoom in and try to find where Norris Dam will be when it gets built. It's not built yet, but here we are in Anderson County. We're looking for Andersonville, which is right here. Coal Creek, which is not labeled on Google Maps, but it's near Fraterville. Coal Creek, we also have another lesson idea about the Coal Creek lease wars. So lots of history going on in this part of the state. So it's on the Clinch River. It's going to be here on the Clinch River. So these are the areas that are going to be flooded. And you can see that what color is it? It's this kind of reddish orange, right? All right, so we'll keep that in mind. So now we know to look down the Tennessee River, and we're gonna find Watts Bar Lake. So what are the towns that it's close to? Well, we can look for Dayton. There's one that I've been to. So Dayton County, right here. That's the county seat of Ray County. And so, okay, I see Evansville, which is right here. We're getting closer. Okay. Spring City. Okay. All right, so here's Spring City up here, and here's Ray Springs. So this this dam is going to be placed right here. So you have this gray part, but then you still have a lot of red, of this reddish orange. So now we want to look at the legend and see what is this reddish orange color. And it's severe sheet erosion with occasional gullies. So that actually makes sense that they're going to want to pick places where they're experiencing severe erosion to dam up the river and prevent that. But there's little or no erosion in the actual river corridor. It's the places where the topography starts getting steeper where that happens, which makes sense. Okay, and now for the fun part, which is that I bring in a blog article from our friends and partners at the Tennessee State Museum, who are also part of this consortium. And I closed it up, so I'm going to have to open it up. It's about underwater ghost towns of Tennessee. So these are the towns that were moved and or flooded when TVA came in to build these dams. And so this is actually a really great thing for fifth graders to read. It's also fun for high schoolers, but it's at the level that fifth graders can read. And it also has at the end some nice vocabulary and some discussion questions, and it lists standards. So this is a great teaching resource. So thanks people from the Tennessee State Museum. But it also names specific places that were flooded. And I'm just going to pick one just to show you an example. And they show you a couple, before I do that, they show you a couple photographs taken by Lewis Hine. Now, the Library of Congress has a lot of Lewis Hine pictures for his campaign against child labor, but this is a different collection. These are photographs of these places before they are flooded in Tennessee. And this collection is at the Tennessee State Museum, and there's a link to it from the lesson idea as well. So we're going to look at one example. Which one? We're going to look at Lewiston. Okay, so there's the town of Lewiston, which was flooded by Norris Dam. And what I like to do, and if you're a map lover like me, you probably like to be like, okay, how can I tell? Oops, I didn't mean to do that. How can I find Lewiston, even though it is now underwater? Well, place names leave a lot of traces. And so I am just looking for the word Lewiston. And so I had to just kind of look all around for quite a while and be like, okay, where, there's got to be a Lewiston around here somewhere. And here it is. So there's Lewiston Point. I found it so that you don't have to. But that's a clue. You may not think about it when you're just hiking there now because there's no town left. But this is a clue that there was a town there named Lewiston, and it is underwater now. And so there are other examples, like if you're going down and looking at the Watts Bar Dam area, there are roads that are like you can tell that they would have gone into the town, but now they just go towards the lake, but it's still got the name of the town on it. And so that gets kids thinking about local landmarks and place names and what stories those have to tell, because place names don't just happen randomly, they happen for reasons. And so why are these things named that? And do they point to a certain history of that area? So there's a lot of different directions that you can take this if you want to, but I really like the way that we can use hyper-localized history to talk about national programs and programs that are really incredibly important on the state level. So here's the link to the Lewis Hine collection at the National Archives, because there are some more photographs of his that are available online at the National Archives. So you can go there and you can see it says fully digitized and now available online. So get there again. Oh, right. You just keep scrolling down and then you get there. And you do have to kind of click on them individually. Farmland in Jefferson County. Note the rolling nature of the land. I love Lewis Hine's ability to write very descriptive captions, which I'm familiar with from his child labor photos. The chair on which she is sitting is an example of the furniture made in the mountain region. Well, we have to look at this chair before I turn it over to Kira. All right. Mountain chair. See, we went from TVA dams to mountain chairs, and your students will love being able to actually make those 6 degrees of separation between them. Okay, so that's about all I want to do before I keep going off on other little rabbit holes. So I'm going to turn it over to Kira so we can jump ahead in time.
Thank you, Stacy. So yes, we are going to jump ahead a few decades, and for our final share here, we are going to look at the civil rights movement in Tennessee. So as I'm sure many of you know, Tennessee has a very rich civil rights history. And as we're teaching about the civil rights movement nationally, it's really important that we kind of bring in some of those Tennessee stories. So we have quite a few lesson plans that we've developed over the years, but one of my favorites that we did a few years ago was on the Highlander Folk School. And we did this one for one of the last multi-day summer institutes that we did, looking at kind of the beginnings of the civil rights movement. And of course, Highlander Folk School was an adult education center that was originally in Grundy County near Monteagle. It was founded in the 1930s by Miles Horton. And originally they did a lot of work with labor organizing. So we think about, the textile workers and miners in East Tennessee in the Appalachia region during the early 20th century, who were kind of working on different labor issues and organizing. Highlander was definitely a part of all of that. Well, in the post-World War II era, they had moved on because of some issues within the labor movement overall, and were trying to work to organize agricultural workers and farmers. And they kept running up on different issues with, trying to get people organized that they could tell like the racial issues were definitely going to be a problem. So they kind of shifted gears and began trying to look at how they could be of assistance in helping to address some of the racial issues at the time. And so beginning in 1953, they actually started hosting workshops and different classes there at the school dealing with school desegregation. So this is a year prior to the Brown versus Board decision from the Supreme Court. And so when we think about this school, so we think about, everything from, Rosa Parks and Dr. King coming to do workshops here prior to the Montgomery bus boycott and that campaign that was a couple of years later. We think about the students from Nashville, like Diane Nash, who were involved in the sit-in movement, who came to Highlander, Septima Clark, and the citizenship schools. So this school is really very, very important to really, the anchors of the civil rights movement, a lot of the key pieces that we think about. So this lesson plan is written for 5th and high school. It is written to be a one-day lesson plan, but of course, you could change this however you saw fit. And the big questions that it tries to answer is, what role did the Highlander Folk School play in building the modern civil rights movement, and what were the consequences of Highlander's work? And so for this, I want to just kind of take you through and show you some of the sources that we used in this. So again, you could think about how you might adapt this and use this with your students, or kind of maybe use these sources in different ways. So there are 5 main sources that we looked at. 2 of them come from the same item, which is this right here, which is one of the annual reports that they put out. And this was put out for essentially what would be the federal fiscal year of 1958. And there are, within the lesson plan, we actually identify, and there are little arrows to it, but I didn't include that on this screen here. But I'm going to show you a couple of passages that you would want students to focus on. So they're not reading the whole page here. There's just a couple of passages that we want to pay particular attention to. So the first one is this area right here that is actually outlined in this box. So here we have a quote that is from Eleanor Roosevelt. And in it, it says, "You are doing a pioneer work here. I know of no other school just like this one. It is very important at this time that this demonstration of democracy be made. We have to prove we believe in a non-communist world that is really a democracy with freedom of opportunity." And this is from when she was speaking at Highlander in June 17th, 1958. So this quote, there's a couple of things in here that I would really want to highlight for students. One, talking about the uniqueness of Highlander, that there was no other place that she knew of that was doing this type of work. So again, speaking to just the importance of it. Again, it is very unique. And then the other is this idea that it is a demonstration of democracy. And having students really kind of dig into what does she mean by that phrase, a demonstration of democracy. And my Cold War loving heart, you really get into that last sentence there, talking about, it is important for us to, to prove that democracy can work in a non-communist world, and there can be freedom of opportunity. So again, you hearkening, connecting the civil rights movement with the Cold War, which I always love when you can do that within a source. So we have that passage. The other that we would want to highlight to connect to that is this one here at the bottom on the left. And this one, and I know it may be a little fuzzy on your screen, so again, I'm going to read this one aloud. It says, a series of workshops on citizenship and integration. Conferences and special programs were highlighted by the visit in June of Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt, who, speaking to a gathering of some 300 people from almost every Southern state, appealed to Americans to prove to the world that democracy is a way of life which benefits all peoples, and praised Highlander for making this demonstration of democracy. So again, this passage gets at, why was she at Highlander? What was going on? And again, this phrase of demonstration of democracy, and again, connecting to why was that important? Why was that important at this time? And why would she, of all people, be here at Highlander talking about the importance of opportunity and how that connects to democracy, and why that's particularly important to highlight to the world. And so again, you could get in for your high school students, more so probably than for your fifth graders, but get into, again, what was going on in the world during this time. We have the Cold War. We have former colonies, especially those in Africa, who were becoming independent nations and deciding on which side of the Cold War they were going to side, and thinking about how Russia was using many of the racial issues in the US to try to persuade them to why they should ought to be communist instead of democracy. So again, all of these great themes that you could bring out here from these passages. There is one more piece that you can highlight, and it is this one right here. And this one, I think, gets into why Highlander was special. And what was their approach to developing community leadership and their model for creating community uplift. And so again, this passage, it's right here in the center corner. And in this paragraph, it reads, we should not seek to improve or to impose our unfamiliar institutional ways, but instead should encourage people to find their own ways of doing things. To develop lay leadership close to the people will make it possible for people themselves to assume responsibility in solving their own problems. To borrow an example from our morning coffee pot, the percolator, rather than the drip method, will encourage ideas to circulate from bottom to top and top to bottom instead of coming from the top down. And so again, here really gets into how did Highlander approach the way that they did education? And it was about uplifting people to be able to address their own problems and to foster community leadership and listening to people. And so I think that, that's another piece that you could really kind of dive into students and have a lot of discussion around, again, why did they take this approach, and how do we see this kind of mirrored in some of the things that we learn about with civil rights organizing across the South. So the next source that you can look at is an excerpt from an oral history with Guy and Candy Carawan, who were both involved in the civil rights movement. Guy Carawan is responsible for songs such as We Shall Overcome. He taught music at Highlander. And Candy had actually been a student in Nashville that was involved in the sit-in movement. And that is what brought her to Fisk originally. I'm not sorry, not to Fisk, but to Highlander, and how she met Guy. And of course, they married and were involved with Highlander throughout their lives. The oral history itself is about an hour long. So again, probably more than you would want to play for students, but there is an excerpt that's included in the lesson plan. I'm going to read just a portion of the excerpt to kind of give you a sense of their story and kind of thinking about what it tells us about Highlander. In this, Candy says, but it was an incredible weekend in other ways. Miles Horton, the director of Highlander, and 2 or 3 other people used the Highlander process, which is asking a lot of questions that really got you thinking beyond what you'd done so far to think about next steps. And we had breakout sessions on what the meaning of nonviolence is, whether it was a tactic or a philosophy for us. What was our relationship with the adult communities that had already been working to try to dismantle segregation? What about the notion of, if you were arrested, rather than coming out and taking all that bail money, staying in jail and putting more pressure on the system? So there was just a range of questions that we struggled with that weekend. And it was a very heady time just to make other people who had been involved in similar situations. And then she goes on to say, I know other people that we've talked to remember it that whenever the meeting got too heavy or the questions were too hard, or whatever, Guy would go off in the room with his guitar, and James Bevel and Bernard Lafayette and others would go in there with him, and they would just keep the singing going. I mean, that's actually been true of Highlander historically. It's always dealt with really hard problems and pressed people to really make good decisions. But they've always used the uplift of culture to enable people to take on some of those hard things, to keep their spirits up. We've always used a lot of music and dance and good food and humor. And so it's part of the Highlander process, actually. And so here again, she's talking about the role of music, the role of questioning, and how they kind of balance kind of challenging each other in really kind of direct ways, with their questioning and debate, but then using music as a way to balance that out. And again, the importance of the music. So again, that's another piece that you could bring in talking about the importance of Highlander. The third source is another one, again, from that same report that we looked at with the first one. And this one, there's about 3 passages that you might want to look at. There is one here at the bottom that talks about some of the topics that some of the future workshops that they are planning. So again, kind of shows you the breadth of what they're covering and how this connects to some of the overall themes and topics addressed in the civil rights movement. And then the other part of this, it starts to get into what was some of the consequences of the work that Highlander was doing. Because as you can imagine, not everyone was super excited about what they were doing and how they were contributing to the movement. And so in this, we see here, this column here on the right gets into a story about a Georgia official who was using his state office and was basically being charged to try to find organizations that were doing civil rights work and try to undermine them. And so one of the things that they talk about right here, here in this bullet point right here, was that it essentially paid for, again, with Georgia state money, they sent in a photographer to Tennessee to go to Highlander and to take pictures of one of the sessions. And then they used those pictures that he took to create different, flyers and billboards and stuff, charging them with being a communist training school. And so there's an image that's fairly famous that was used that shows Dr. King and a multitude of others. There's like a circle around Dr. King's, face with like a little arrow drawn, talking about, them going to this communist training school. And then we see another passage here that you could highlight that talks about some issues that they were having with the IRS. And so having their tax exempt status taken away, and it had just recently been restored. And so you can kind of get into, again, what were some of the challenges that they were facing because of their work. The fourth source that we include here, this is an excerpt from a letter written from Virginia Durr, who was a longtime supporter of the Montgomery Improvement Association to Rosa Parks. And this was written in 1959. So this is, after the boycott. And so in here, Ms. Durr is telling her, she's talking some about some of the other people that are involved in the movement. So for example, Edie Nixon's wife, since her father had died and she took it awfully hard. They took a trip and are just back. Both look well, and Mr. Nixon comes by every day to ask about Mr. Williams. I think he is some better in his spirits than he was, although he is still right bitter about the treatment he received. And I can't say I blame him too much, although getting mad does not do much good. At least the MIA, so again, the Montgomery Improvement Association, did come out in defense of Highlander. And old man Solomon Say was there when it was raided, and he got awfully mad and spoke right out and publicly in defense of it, which I was glad to see. Miles Horton, who was the founder for Highlander, called up the other day to ask about Aubrey Williams, and he said the hearing on the 2nd of November was going to be awfully rough, as they are still going, or they're going to try and close the school down entirely. So here, some things we can learn from this passage. Again, the people from Montgomery, again, who had been trained there prior to the boycott, were still very much involved with Highlander even years later. This was written again in 1959. And that in fact had been there one of the times that the school had been raided by law enforcement as the state was working to try to shut down the school. And so again, it also mentions, again, this hearing that they were about to go forward, and that they really thought that the school was going to be shut down as part of the efforts to begin to stop their work. And then the final source that we look at is another excerpt from an oral history. And this one is from Dorothy Cotton, who may be a name that many of your students are not familiar with. She was a woman who worked with Dr. King in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which of course was his organization and the organization that many of the ministers were a part of. And in this interview, there's an excerpt in which she's talking about her involvement with Highlander. And she's talking about being sent to Highlander. So she says, but I was asked to go over to Highlander, and because Dr. King and company must have seen the handwriting on the wall, they, meaning Highlander, were just taunted all the time and charged, just had many charges leveled against them. But when Dr. King asked me if I could go over there to just meet the people and check out the school to get to know something of the school, I did just that. I went to Highlander and met this woman, September Clark. And September was working there at the Highlander Folk School. She had been fired from the Charleston school system. She had been a teacher, but she was fired because she would not say whether or not she was a member of the NAACP or not. And Isa Jenkins in September met actually at a conference at the Highlander Folk School. And she goes on to say, fast forward a little bit here to a time when the citizenship education program that is helping functionally illiterate Black folk, African-American people, understand their political power. It just grew when September and Isa met each other there at the Highlander Folk School. Isa was wanting people to discover their political power, and literacy training was a major part of that. So my being there, meeting September, who had now moved, came over from Charleston to work there at Highlander, and Isa and her were working together now. And I just want to tell you that Highlander was fighting for its very life in the courts at this time, and they lost that battle. In other words, the state confiscated their property, beautiful property there in the Cumberland Mountains. And because they lost that property, so Highlander in terms of location was kind of in a limbo for a while. Ultimately, they got a new property, but between the time that was actually lost, it was actually from losing the Highlander Folk School, the people were funding these workshops. So September could help them learn to read and write, and Isa was talking about the political aspect of it. Everybody wanted to make sure that this training continued. SCLC, now my organization, Dr. King's organization, inherited those training schools. So in this one, again, we see, what were the consequences of the work that Highlander was doing. Here she talks about that the state, shutting down the school, confiscating their property that was there in Grundy County. But that, Highlander had been working with Dr. King to try to transition, especially over this important program that they were running with the citizenship education program, to SCLC, so that work could continue as Highlander was going through this transitional period. So Highlander moves, they get shut down in 1962, moved to Knoxville, where they get a new charter, change their name slightly, are in Knoxville for a few years, and then in 1972 moved to Newmarket, where they have been and are still there operating today. So again, this lesson plan has got these 5 sources that you could use in a multitude of ways, whether you wanted to do, work through a couple as a group, as a class, if you wanted to set them up and do stations. There is a worksheet that's got some key identified questions, especially for the first 3 sources. And so again, a lot of different ways that you could use this. So hopefully this gives you something to think about, because again, I think Highlander is a really wonderful story that we need to highlight more as we teach Tennessee history, because its influence really is throughout the civil rights movement, and we have a hard time teaching the civil rights movement without touching on Highlander. The other thing that I want to mention in my remaining time, which, we are almost done. So a couple quick things. So we do have several other great resources for teaching the civil rights movement. We have a couple of lesson plans on the Clinton 12, a primary source set on civil rights movement in Tennessee. And then I've included a couple of newsletter lesson ideas here that I think are really great, have identified some great sources in these that you could, again, pull out and use in a multitude of ways. So you can find this PowerPoint on the Padlet, so you can access these links, get to those great primary sources, and hopefully be able to adapt those and use those with your students. All right, so let me pull up change PowerPoints here real quick and get to the closing slides. We have one other source that we're not going to have time to talk about today, but we'll add it to the Padlet. And of course, that is our World War II home front in Tennessee curriculum. And so we've got a new page on our website where you can find that. And so we'll add that to the Padlet so you can access that. And there's some great new supplementary videos that we have added that again, get at some Tennessee stories that maybe you're not as familiar with. So again, you can find all those resources there on the Padlet page. And a couple of other quick things. Oh, wait, I forgot to add this. So we don't have a webinar next month. This again is the last one that we are doing for this school year. But if you missed any of the ones that we have done throughout this year, again, you can find all those on the Padlet. We have a survey that our Discover Tennessee History Consortium has been doing. It's an educator survey. We are working together to try to collect information about how our consortium can better serve you guys, both as a whole and as individual organizations. So if you've not had a chance to fill this out, use this QR code, pull that up. We invite you to do so. Again, we are really trying to get information and input from as many educators across the state as we can about the types of PD that you would like to see, the types of educational resources that you're looking for as you go forward. And if you are interested in receiving PD credit, please do take a moment to fill out the survey that we have for this particular session. This is how we award PD credit. You must fill out the survey, and then we will email you your certificate of participation. You can also access that survey using this QR code. So again, that might be a little easier for you to get to the link that way. So again, take a moment, fill that out. We send those out about once a week. So if you've not gotten your certificate within a week, definitely reach out and let me know. Our Discover Tennessee History Consortium will be releasing a new website soon, so you can find information on all of our programs and resources that we're offering. And we will be back in touch with everyone in the coming months with ideas about new programs that we will be offering as a whole. But of course, all of our partner organizations are offering PD and workshops individually. So definitely check out the shared calendar that will be on that website that we'll be sharing for information on those individual sessions. Thank you guys so much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Have a great day.